The courtroom felt as though it was submerged in a dense fog, heavy, silent, and suffocating to the point where I felt there was no room left in my chest to breathe. Every eye was fixed on the center, where I sat, motionless in my wheelchair, dressed in full military uniform. My medals gleamed under the fluorescent lights, but my heart held no light at all. Beside me, Rex, a large and majestic German shepherd, sat alert, his eyes watchful, body taut as if ready to spring into action at any moment. To those in the room, Rex was just a standard service dog, but to me, he was family. I gripped the leash tightly with my right hand, the one that still had feeling while inside. My entire body trembled, not from fear, but from the helplessness that wrapped around me like a verdict already rendered. The judge spoke, his voice cold and laced with merciless finality. The military has made its decision. Rex will be reassigned to a new mission. He is national property. I swallowed hard. After all the years of life and death together, surviving scorched battlefields and enemy fire, now they were treating Rex like an asset to be redeployed? My grip tightened, my thumb quivering, and my voice almost cracked. Your Honor, I began, my throat tightening with emotion. Rex is not just military property. He's the reason I'm still alive. I raised my head, trying to steady my voice. On the battlefield, Rex pulled me out of enemy fire, shielded me from shrapnel, and warned me of traps before I could even see them. But more importantly, when I came home, with wounds not just on my body but buried deep in my soul, it was Rex who kept me tethered to this world. I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror. And only Rex was there. No judgment, no walking away. I took a deep breath, and my voice cracked near the end. Please don't take Rex from me. Don't take away the one thing that's still keeping me grounded. The courtroom remained silent, eyes red-rimmed. Some wiped away tears, some turned their faces, unable to look at me, and others, stunned, as if realizing for the first time that war doesn't just take a soldier's legs. It drains whatever's left of them inside. The judge looked at me for a long time, his face unreadable. He leaned forward to deliver the verdict. Every second stretched into eternity. But then, it happened. No warning, no sound to foreshadow it. Rex suddenly leapt up. The leash slipped from my hand. His bark exploded like thunder through the courtroom. He charged forward, straight toward the judge's bench, fur bristled, barking in deep, deliberate bursts, as if issuing a warning. Everyone in the room snapped to attention. Whispers rippled through the air. What's going on? Why is the dog doing that? A trained service dog doesn't just lose control, right? But I didn't move, not out of shock, but because I knew exactly what was happening. Rex, I called, my voice shaking, but deep down, I recognized that look in his eyes, that low growl in his throat. I had seen it countless times on the battlefield, and every single time, it meant danger was near. I gripped the armrest of my wheelchair, leaning forward. Rex never barks for no reason, I said firmly, my voice cutting through the murmurs. He's sensing something. Something isn't right. The judge froze, his hand still clutching the gavel. But he hadn't struck it. His gaze moved from Rex to me. The air in the courtroom thickened. The eyes that had once looked at me with pity now showed fear. Rex barked louder. Then suddenly, he spun around, staring intently at the heavy wooden door at the far end of the room. I swallowed hard. There was no doubt anymore. What was about to enter wasn't merely a legal judgment. And Rex, the dog who had once pulled me from the jaws of death, was about to do it again. The courtroom froze in that moment, as Rex's eyes locked onto the heavy wooden door at the back of the room. His body tense, ears erect, and a low growl rumbled from his chest like distant thunder echoing beneath the earth. I held my breath. My heart pounded wildly in my chest. Rex was sensing something none of us could see. The judge frowned, saying nothing. The gavel in his hand hovered midair. A tall police officer standing near the door, seemingly seasoned, rested his hand on the holster at his side. But his voice was low, uncertain, probably just a crowd reaction. I shook my head, my eyes never leaving Rex. No, I said, loud enough to cut through the rising murmurs. Rex doesn't react like that to noise. He was trained to stay calm under gunfire. If Rex is growling, it's because he smells a threat. My words cast a strange silence over the room, as if everyone had just stepped to the edge of something they didn't dare believe. The judge glanced at the officers, hesitated, then gave a slight nod. "Check that door." 2 officers began to move toward the back of the room. Rex immediately responded, growling louder, barking in sharp bursts, as if warning them that whatever was behind that door should not be touched. One of the officers, the taller of the 2, gripped the cold metal doorknob. I saw beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He glanced back at his partner, then slowly, very slowly, turned the handle and pushed the door open. The squealing hinges groaned into the silence, startling someone in the gallery who dropped their phone to the floor. Behind the door was a narrow hallway, dimly lit, stretching into darkness. "There's nothing there," the shorter officer said, his voice strained with tension. But Rex thought otherwise. He was nearly lunging, all 4 legs braced against the ground, muscles twitching, eyes locked onto the darkness beyond the door. Rex saw something, or sensed it, and I believed that more than I believed the light in front of me. Suddenly, clang, a metallic clang, sharp and chilling, rang out from deep within the hallway. The entire room held its breath. The shorter officer quickly shone his flashlight down the corridor. Is someone there?" he asked, voice trembling, frozen in place. Rex barked so loudly the sound echoed off the ceiling. I gripped the leash as though I were holding back a missile. Rex pulled with such force that my wheelchair slid forward a few inches. No one could remain calm. The whispers turned to panicked muttering. A few people stood up, turning away, preparing to leave. "Rex, stay," I commanded, but my voice had already broken under the pressure of fear swelling inside me like a storm cloud about to burst. The tall officer cautiously stepped into the hallway, gun drawn. His footsteps echoed like a countdown to something irreversible. Suddenly, a blurred motion appeared at the far end of the hallway. The flashlight beam caught it for a fraction of a second, not long enough to identify, but enough to make the shorter officer scream and stumble backward. There's something moving," he stammered. A cold wave crawled down my spine. I'd seen that look in Rex's eyes when he spotted a sniper. I'd heard that growl when we were ambushed in the deserts of Afghanistan. And now, I was hearing it again. Right here, in a courtroom in America. "We need to evacuate," I shouted, but no one moved. Panic was no longer just a concept. It had become a living thing, and Rex was the only one standing between it and the rest of us. The air felt thick, as if every molecule in the courtroom had frozen solid from fear. I couldn't tear my eyes away from that hallway. And neither could Rex, his gaze locked on the place where the dense darkness had begun to devour the last trace of light. "Rex sees something," I whispered, barely realizing I'd spoken. "I don't know what it is, but it's there." A footstep. Clack, clack, clack. Slow, deliberate, as if whatever was in that hallway wanted us to hear it. Wanted us to count every single step. A chill ran down my spine. Those footsteps didn't stagger or falter. They were calm in a way that felt unnatural, as though the person approaching wasn't afraid of being discovered at all. Rex let out a deep growl. No longer a soft warning. This was a growl of readiness, of a predator cornered and prepared to strike. "Fall back," I shouted to the 2 officers. "Fall back now." But it was too late. A tall figure stepped out of the shadows, slowly coming into view beneath the flickering light of the officer's flashlight. A thick gray hooded cloak covered his face, hands buried deep in the pockets of a heavy coat. His posture upright, arrogant, like a man stepping onto a stage of honor, in a room trembling with dread. Rex lunged forward, nearly snapping the leash. I had to brace myself, feeling like my whole body was being dragged by his fury. "Stop, hands where I can see them," the officer barked, his gun already raised. The stranger halted. A moment of silence swept through the room. He lifted his head, and when his eyes caught the faint light, I felt my entire body go rigid. Cold, empty, as if he wasn't looking at me, but straight through me. "Relax," he said, voice low and smooth. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." But it was the way he said it that terrified me the most. The courtroom remained frozen. Rex growled louder, baring his teeth. I knew that sound. He didn't just sense a threat. He knew this man was dangerous. One officer shone his flashlight directly into the man's face. But the man didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't step back. "Who are you? Why are you here?" the officer asked, voice rough with tension. The man slowly reached into his coat pocket. The motion made both officers instinctively step back. their fingers tightening on their triggers. "Don't," I shouted. "Don't do anything reckless." But he continued anyway, not hurried, not afraid. Then, he pulled out a small metallic key, gleaming under the flashlight. No one understood what it meant, but the fear was unmistakable, chilling to the core. Rex barked wildly, the leash jerking so hard it burned my hand. I whispered, "That's no ordinary key. He's hiding something more." The stranger smiled, a crooked grin, cold and deep as an abyss. Then he said, "Your dog, he's special, isn't he?" I froze. "How do you know about Rex?" My voice came out like a breath of wind. He lifted the key. "Everyone will know soon," he said, and turned the key in his hand, as if unlocking an invisible door. In that instant, all the lights in the courtroom went out. A complete, engulfing darkness swallowed everything. Screams erupted, chairs crashed, breath quickened, metal clashed, and in the midst of that darkness, only one sound echoed. Rex's furious barking. The entire courtroom was swallowed in a pitch-black darkness, thick and suffocating like ink, where Rex's barking echoed violently, as if awakening an ancient entity slumbering beneath the wood and marble. I could hear screams, the clatter of metal, and the chaotic stomping of feet on the glossy wooden floor. "Rex!" I shouted into the void, though I wasn't sure how loud it came out. Something was choking my throat, like an invisible hand was squeezing my heart from the inside. Then, the lights flickered back on. But the room was no longer the same. He, the stranger with the metallic key, was no longer alone. Two other figures had appeared behind him. Tall, slender, cloaked in dark robes. Their faces were completely hidden. No one could make out their features. But what they carried in their hands were long, metallic, razor-sharp objects, like blades, or tools designed for something unspeakable. The entire gallery erupted in panic. Chairs toppled, people shoved each other, rushing toward the emergency exits. Someone fell, a voice screamed, "They're armed," and any semblance of order disintegrated. I remained there, alone in the chaos, with Rex growling beside me. His whole body taut like a drawn bow, his blazing eyes never leaving the stranger. And then I understood. He hadn't come for me. He'd come for Rex. "Hold your position," the taller officer shouted. Flashlight aimed directly at the three intruders. Gun level with his eyes. "Do not move." But the leader stepped forward, calmly, as if the gun didn't exist. He spoke, voice low but razor sharp. "No one has to get hurt. I'm only here for the dog." The room froze. I clenched the leash, bracing myself in the wheelchair, my voice trembling with fury. "You're not taking Rex anywhere." He tilted his head slightly, as if surprised by my resolve. Then his gaze flicked to Rex, the kind of look a surgeon gives an artifact of immeasurable value just before dissection. "Keeping him only makes this harder," he said. "He was born to serve something greater. You don't understand." I felt the blood rise to my throat. "Rex isn't your property," I hissed through gritted teeth. "He's my partner, my family. If you want him, you'll have to get through me." Rex barked loud and sharp, almost leaping forward, causing the wheels of my chair to skid slightly. He knew. He understood. The tension in the room reached a breaking point. The remaining people in the gallery didn't know whether to flee or stay. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, but the sound had lost all meaning. Order had collapsed. The law was powerless. The stranger's gaze darkened, and then he spoke, in a voice low and thunderous, like a storm brewing. "You don't understand. He's the key." Before I could react, he raised his hand, and the two figures behind him stepped forward, like a pair of blades closing in on their target. The courtroom now felt no different than a bombed-out military zone. Every glance, every breath was caught between three dark figures and my dog, Rex. I clenched the leash so tightly I felt like my fingers might snap. But Rex stood his ground, growling like a war machine that never retreats. The lead figure slowly raised his hand, making a signal I couldn't decipher. Instantly, the two others flanked to each side, forming a pincer movement, locking in directly on the spot where Rex and I sat. I screamed, "Back off, I'm warning you." But no one listened. They weren't here to negotiate. The tall police officer finally understood the truth. He drew his gun, leveled it at the intruders, and shouted, "Stop right there. This is your final warning." Yet the stranger's voice remained eerily calm. "If you truly understood what that dog is, He said, "You wouldn't be standing with it." I shouted. "He's the only one who saved my life in hell. You don't know anything about Rex." The stranger tilted his head slightly, smiling, a cold smile that didn't touch his eyes. "No, I know more than you think. For instance, that dog was never born like a normal dog." The room tilted, as if being pulled by a different gravity. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. Not because I was in shock, but because some part of me, deep in my gut, had always known something wasn't normal. Rex never reacted like other dogs. He could sense buried mines, hidden enemies, and even things the military's most advanced tech never detected. I stammered, "What do you mean? What is Rex?" The man didn't answer. He simply pulled from his coat a rectangular metallic device, its surface embedded with microcircuit patterns. He held it up under the dim light. Rex growled violently, nearly snapping the leash in my hands. "No," I shouted, but Rex had already lunged a step forward. The lights flickered again. The man pointed at Rex, as if issuing a command. And then, the device lit up, emitting a barely audible click. Immediately, Rex let out a piercing howl, not of pain, but of inner turmoil, as if fighting something from deep within himself. I lunged forward to hold Rex, shouting, "No, Rex, stay with me. You're not something to be controlled." Rex's eyes turned blood red, his whole body shaking uncontrollably. The room descended into terror. The officer screamed, "Drop that device. Drop it now." A gunshot rang out. People screamed. The device clattered to the floor. Rex collapsed in my arms. Gasping, I pressed my hand against his chest. The heart still beat, but his eyes had changed. Rex looked at me, not like a dog, but like a soul that had just crossed the threshold of control. And I understood. They once controlled him, but not anymore. The stranger staggered back from the missed shot, blood trickling from his mouth, and smirked. "This is far from over." The courtroom was no longer a place for justice. It had become a psychological battlefield, where every belief was tested, and every breath carried a vague, creeping fear. I knelt beside Rex, my hand still gripping the leash, now torn nearly in half. His eyes looked into mine like a child waking from a nightmare with no escape. "You're still you, aren't you, Rex?" He didn't answer, but the way his head lowered gently onto my thigh, his ears drooping, his breath still trembling, it told me everything. Inside that dog, the soul was still there. The tall officer approached, his gun now pointed toward the floor. His eyes no longer reflected caution, but pure confusion. "Mr. Alexander, we need to know. Who was that man? And what is that dog?" I swallowed hard. Even I had never asked too many questions. Rex had always been perfect, always loyal, always right. I'd loved him like a companion, never doubting him. But now, fragmented memories began to stitch together. One time, on a mission in the Syrian desert, Rex detected a mine over 20 meters away, while the Army's most advanced detection gear gave a clear reading. Another time, when I had passed out from blood loss, he didn't run off to find help. He dragged me to a mobile medic unit whose coordinates we weren't even aware of. And the most haunting, that night he sat silently next to me, unmoving for 3 straight hours, his eyes fixed in a direction, just before an ambush erupted exactly where he'd been watching. I clenched my fist. Rex isn't just a service dog. He's the product of a special experimental program. I've heard it called Project 17. A young officer from the corner rushed over. Project 17? I've seen that designation in a redacted Department of Defense document. They talked about bio-enhanced entities, like they were conscious sensors. I nodded. Rex was never an ordinary dog. He was born in an underground lab, no mother, no litter. The room thickened with tension, as though the air itself wanted to hold on to every word. But what made me trust him is that no matter what he was made for, Rex always chose to do what was right. I turned to Rex. He hadn't moved, but the panic in his eyes had faded. He was alert. The older officer furrowed his brow. Then who was that man? Why did he know how to activate Rex? I answered. Only a handful of people were ever part of Project 17. I never met him before. But I believe he's one of the original engineers, the ones who programmed the neural reflex systems for subjects like Rex. That device wasn't just a key, it was a high-level control signal. At that moment, Another officer burst into the room with a slim file folder bearing a bright red stamp. Classified, unauthorized access prohibited. Mr. Alexander, we just cracked into an old Pentagon storage node. There's an unusual file named Canis Sentinel-17. You need to see this. I opened the folder. The first page was a photo of Rex, as a newborn creature inside an incubator. Wires plugged into his tiny body. Below it, a note read, Version 17 stability level. 94% response to direct commands. Operational. Risk of command rejection due to emotional attachment. High. My heart clenched. They knew that if Rex developed a strong enough emotional bond with someone, he could reject even the original programming. I stroked Rex's head. And he chose me. The officer nodded solemnly. Then, what happens when they come back? They won't walk away from a multi-million-dollar project so easily. I gripped the leash tighter. Eyes still locked on the door where the three intruders had vanished. They will come back, but next time, they won't just come for Rex. They'll come for what Rex has overcome, for what they've never been able to control, loyalty. And I knew, the real battle was only just beginning. It started raining that afternoon, an abrupt downpour. Heavy and unannounced. The sky hung low, stretched taut like it was holding back a rage waiting to be unleashed. I sat in the small living room, the window facing the backyard where Rex was lying beneath the awning. Eyes fixed on the far end of the alleyway. There was something in his posture that kept me uneasy. Rex wasn't sleeping. He didn't blink, didn't relax like he usually did. He was waiting. I knew that. And I was waiting too. When the clock struck exactly 1700, a black car pulled up in front of the gate. No license plate. No driver stepped out. The car door opened automatically. And a gray envelope was gently dropped to the ground through the narrow gap in the car. Rex stood up. So did I. The envelope was soaked by the rain. But the seal was unmistakable. Recall order, bioagent number 17 ID code. Rex 0017. I didn't need to open it to know what was coming. A reactivation order. They wanted Rex back. Not for justice. Not for duty. But because they couldn't accept being disobeyed by a dog. They couldn't accept that a being designed for obedience had chosen freedom. I burned the envelope right there on the spot. Flames roared, devouring the thick waterproofed paper. It wasn't an act of rebellion. It was a declaration. That night, we left the house. No car. No phone. Just me, Rex, an old backpack, and memories that never truly faded. We headed to an abandoned outpost in the northern mountains, once a training facility during the early phase of the Canis Sentinel project. I had researched it thoroughly. Though the program was officially shut down 5 years ago, the remnants left behind still held the breath of things that were never meant to be human. Rex hesitated when we neared the gate. A soft whine escaped his throat, like a child being pulled back into a memory it had tried to forget. I know, Rex, but we have to go back. If we don't face the past, we'll never be free from it. The rusted metal gate opened without a sound. Someone had already unlocked it. Inside, darkness awaited. Rex went first. I followed, each step slow and deliberate, like walking into the lair of a beast that had just awakened from a long hibernation. When we reached the old control room, the lights flickered on automatically. A voice echoed from the aged intercom system, old, but clear. Welcome back, Alexander. We knew you would come. I gripped the armrest of my wheelchair. That voice, cold, emotionless, neither male nor female, unmistakably the AI that ran the facility. Project 17 hadn't been terminated. It had gone underground. Rex growled, stepping back, fur along his spine bristling. I'm not here to cooperate. I said, I'm here to end this. The voice didn't sound angry. It simply released a soft, flat chuckle. Pity. Because the others from the project are on their way. And they're not coming to negotiate. At that moment, the main screen lit up. 3 faces appeared. Striker 03, Vena 06, and Orion 02. All of them were biological agents who once trained alongside Rex in the early phase. All of them were listed as terminated in the official records. But they were still alive. Or at least, something like them. We have only a few hours, I said, opening the hidden compartment in my wheelchair. Inside was a localized signal jamming device, the only thing that could protect Rex from a reprogramming broadcast. I attached the device to Rex's collar. You chose this path, and I won't let them drag you back to the place you escaped from. Rex looked at me and nodded. Behind the metal walls, footsteps echoed, heavy, steady, cold as the darkness ready to devour us all. They were coming, and Rex and I, we were the final line of defense. The first sound echoed like a choked warning, the screech of metal grinding against metal. Steady, cold, reverberating from the end of the corridor that led deep into the heart of the abandoned complex. Rex stood close by my side, his eyes gleaming like reflections of fire. His body coiled tight like an arrow ready to be loosed. I reached for the signal disruption device attached to Rex's collar, making sure it was still active. If we lost it, any activation signal from the central system could turn Rex back into what he was once programmed to be, a killing machine without emotion. The final door slid open. Striker 03 was the first to emerge. Slightly taller than Rex, his dark fur was almost armored, and his glowing red eyes were utterly soulless. Behind him, Vena 06 followed, smaller in frame, but each movement was razor-sharp, swift as a dagger. Orion 02 closed in from the rear, moving unhurriedly, his gait calm, as though the battle ahead was merely a formality to be completed. It's been a long time, Rex, Striker growled, his voice low and syrupy, like something mechanical driving it from behind. Rex didn't respond, but I could feel his body tensing, each muscle tightening, every movement infused with memory. This wasn't just a confrontation between creations of the same project. This was a survival war between souls devoured, and a soul that had reclaimed its freedom. We're here to take you back. Vena spoke, her voice mechanical but still laced with deception. No one is permitted to leave the program. And if he refuses? I asked. Orion simply pulled out a device that looked exactly like the one the stranger had wielded back in the courtroom. A red light on the device began to blink. Rex growled, the sound erupting deep from his chest. The disruption device on his collar emitted a strange tone. The signal was being interfered with. I immediately dropped to my knees and adjusted the frequency manually. Rex's eyes met mine. There was no fear. Only one message. Don't let me go back. Not a chance, I whispered, like a vow. The battle began. Striker lunged first. Rex spun, bit down on his wrist, and dragged him to the floor. Vena darted in like smoke from behind. But I had already retrieved a small EMP grenade hidden in the wheelchair's armrest. One precise throw. The hallway lights flickered violently. Both opponents recoiled, convulsing for a few seconds, just enough time for Rex to position himself in front of me. Orion hadn't moved. He watched, analyzing. Rex panted heavily, froth foaming slightly at the corner of his mouth. But his eyes remained focused. No one knew Rex like I did. He didn't fight because of orders. Not because of implanted instinct. He fought for freedom, and for me. Alexander. A new female voice echoed through the intercom system. We can end this. Just surrender and hand over Rex. I turned to face the nearest camera. Calm. I don't negotiate with shadows. Just then, Orion began to walk forward. But instead of engaging, he stopped in front of Rex and bowed his head. No more blood, he said softly, like an ancient command repeating itself from deep within his code. Freedom is the only thing we've never been allowed to try. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Striker and Vena had already retreated behind him, no longer charging. Something in Rex's gaze, loyalty without blindness, courage without fear of loss, had awakened what was left of humanity within these programmed beings. We can't go back, Striker exhaled, but you still can. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. These creatures, once designed as tools, as weapons, were now handing Rex the chance to walk away. I nodded. Let's go, Rex. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He already knew. We exited the control room as the hallway lights began to flicker, a signal the facility was self-destructing. Behind us, Striker, Vena, and Orion remained, standing like ghosts, no hatred. Only the quiet resolve of those who had nothing left to lose, but had reclaimed a sliver of meaning in their final act. On the way back, Rex didn't lie beneath the wheelchair like he usually did. He walked beside me, head held high. Freedom is not about being forgiven. Freedom is when you know who you are, and choose never to return to the cage that once devoured you. That day, The air in the courtroom was no longer weighed down by the heaviness of the law, but by the sky, tightening with the storm of a tempest waiting to break free. I, Alexander, had been summoned again. But this time not to fight for the right to keep a dog. This time, I was here to face those who once stood behind everything: Project Rex. The experiments, the distorted memories, and truths that had never been recorded in any official file. Rex sat beside me. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply stared across the room at a chair opposite us. Sitting there were 3 men in gray suits, specialists, from the Bureau of Biotechnological Warfare Operations, representatives of an organization that had never been acknowledged, yet held the power of life and death over top-secret military programs. "We are here today," one of them began, his voice flat and mechanical, "because you have violated a level red security protocol. You have escaped with a biological asset that has not yet been released from its programming protocols." "You mean, my companion?" I asked, my gaze unwavering. "We are referring to the entity code named REX-07. An artificial biological construct, developed and perfected under the funding of the national defense budget." I let out a quiet chuckle. The room collectively held its breath. "How fascinating," I said, voice low but firm. "That something capable of feeling emotion, of sacrifice, and of love, is being referred to as a mere asset." "Your Honor," my lawyer interjected, "we have decrypted files showing that Rex-07 is not just a product of genetic engineering. His nervous system is capable of learning, of distinguishing right from wrong, and, most importantly, of choosing." I inserted an encrypted USB drive into the central projector. The screen displayed unreleased video footage. Rex, still in his early training phase, shielding a child from gunfire in a conflict zone. Rex, disobeying a command to retreat in order to rescue an injured soldier. And finally, Rex standing between me and a gun held by a soldier under deep programming. "Is this instinct," I asked, "or something that goes beyond anything you ever imagined?" The courtroom fell into utter silence. One of the 3 men from the bureau folded his hands and looked ready to stand. But before he could move, the voice of the prosecutor echoed from the opposing bench, a woman with a calm demeanor but eyes like blades. "I propose that we suspend the session," she said. All eyes turned toward her, a woman whose presence had until then gone unnoticed. "I was once part of the early phase biological testing team," she continued, "and I know what you're trying to bury. Project Rex was never just a biological trial. It was an ethical experiment, and one we failed." She raised a file. "Psychological Response Report, Freedom Threshold Level." Signed by one of the very 3 men now seated across from me, whose face had turned pale as if the blood had drained out. "You knew," she said, "that once Rex crossed the threshold of obedience. He was no longer an asset, he was a witness." The silence that followed cracked through the room like thunder. I gripped Rex's harness tightly, feeling him lean against my leg, as if to remind me we still had a long road ahead. But at least now, the truth had started to find its voice. The judge, an elderly man with the eyes of someone who had seen too much, nodded after a long pause. "I will order a full investigation into the entirety of Project Rex. And until that time, the right of possession, no, the right of companionship, with this biological entity shall remain with Sergeant Alexander." I did not smile. I simply placed my hand on Rex's head. "We haven't won yet, buddy, but at least, today, we're no longer silenced." Rex didn't bark, but in his eyes, I saw understanding, and I knew the final battle still lay ahead. A battle where we would have to confront those behind the curtain. Where the questions would no longer be about a dog, but about the very nature of freedom, of life, and of what truly makes a being human. A classified file marked in red, REX-07, Gen OME Alpha, lay at the center of the table. The room was dark. Neon lights flickered as if even the space itself hesitated before revealing what was about to unfold. I, Alexander, sat beside Rex, heart pounding not from fear, but from a truth I had never imagined. Rex was not just a dog. He was the result of something far beyond science. The file was thick. Every page held lines of clinical, chilling language, genetic manipulation synthesis, ethical defiance testing, uncoded learning functions, and the final line that tightened my chest. Entity REX-07 has exhibited emotion, voluntary decision-making, and psychological trauma response. I looked up and met the eyes of Sylvia, a former project specialist, the woman brave enough to step out of the shadows to bring me these documents. "Did you know?" she whispered. "Rex wasn't the first product. But he's the only one that made it. All the previous versions failed, either emotionless or unable to survive grief." I froze. "You mean, Rex knows sadness?" Sylvia nodded. "Not just sadness. He remembers, he sacrifices, and he mourns." I turned to Rex. He was watching us. Not with panic, not with unease, but with something uncannily close to human. Sylvia played the final video, a lab room. Rex, still young, being tested with ethically compromised commands. Bite unarmed target. Abandon wounded teammate. He refused, not with rebellion, but with a look, a single gaze filled with a question. Why? He was the only specimen. Sylvia said softly. Who questioned the orders he was given? I fell silent. Memories came rushing in. The moment I was ready to end my life. And Rex, without command, pushed open the door, laid his head on my lap, and simply breathed. Not a bark, not a sound, but enough to break me into tears. He saved me, I said, choking on the words, not just on the battlefield, but afterward, when no one else could understand the weight I brought home. Sylvia nodded slowly. Because Rex doesn't just carry canine DNA. He has a fragment of human genome. A very small part, but the most important one. I stood and stepped into the corridor of the old military facility, where it had all begun. Rex walked beside me, light-footed like a spirit guiding a survivor. And I realized, this was never just a fight for custody. It was a fight to make the world accept that sometimes, a soul can reside in a form we never expect. Rex, codename 07, was not a biological weapon. Not a successful experiment. And certainly not an ethical anomaly. He was something the very people who created him never anticipated. A living being who knew how to love, and chose to stay beside the one he called family. I placed my hand on Rex's head. If they come back, I whispered, we won't run anymore. We'll tell the world who you really are. Rex looked up at me. And nodded.